So we're still talking about inflation, and we want to specifically talk about in this section who are the winners and losers and how are they created, what is indexing to inflation and how much does it help, and then in general, what are the dangers still of inflation? We need to really understand why it's a bad thing. So again, the idea of adjusting for inflation can be done with anything, your wage rate, GDP, how about the interest rate? We worked this problem already in another video, but here it is again. And it's basically, how do you figure out if you're getting, how much you should charge if you're a bank or a lender? How much should you pay in interest if you're a borrower? It all comes down to the real interest rate. So while you're doing your planning, you might think about what you expect the inflation rate to be and what you want to get in real interest rate. This can be rearranged, of course, by adding inflation to both sides, and you get this. So for instance, if you know that you want to earn 4% real interest rate and the inflation rate is 3%, you might think of charging 7% for your nominal interest rate. And here's another practice problem. Simone works for a firm that automatically adjusts her wages to the annual rate of inflation. Jin works for a firm that grants its employees a 5% annual income increase. Mohammed is retired and receives two payments, a pension payment that is fixed at $2,000 per month and a Social Security payment of $1,000 per month. The Social Security payment is indexed or tied to the inflation rate. Now, suppose that the inflation rate is 8% this year. Who was helped and who was hurt? So we're not looking at interest rate here, we're looking at real wage, and we're adjusting for inflation. And then case B, what if the inflation rate is even higher at 20%? And the question is, who is worse off and who is better off? So think this through and then we'll discuss the solutions. So Simone is indexed. Her income is indexed. So at 8%, her real income is not going to change. And that's also true if it's 20%. So she's unaffected by inflation rate. Jin is worse off because his income rises by 5%, but inflation was 8%. So he isn't hurt entirely, but he does lose ground to the tune of about 3%. And that is also true for the next year. In fact, it's even worse. So if with a 5%, that's not going to make nearly as much of a dent in the 20%. He's 15% worse off. And Mohammed is more complicated because he's got two things going on. The pension does not adjust with the inflation rate, so he's going to be hurt whenever inflation happens, either in the 8% or even worse in the 20%, big erosion into purchasing power. But the Social Security is indexed, so he's not going to lose any purchasing power on that portion of his income in either the 8% or the 20% cases. So in the 1970s, when there was rapid increases in inflation that took everyone by surprise, guess what? The borrowers were helped and the lenders were hurt. So it's interesting that not everything is indexed to inflation, right? So minimum wage is one of those things that does not have an indexation to inflation. So unless policymakers increase it, what can happen is that the real value of minimum wage drops whenever there's inflation. So let's think again about what, if we are to believe the dangers of inflation, when inflation gets out of hand, policymakers are going to try to bring it down. But that process of what's called disinflation, or the slowing down of inflation, prices are still rising, but they're rising at a lower rate, right? So instead of 20% inflation, it's like 15%. It's not deflation, prices are not falling, they're just rising more slowly. If policymakers are going to do that, they're going to have to slow down people's spending, because that's one of the biggest factors in deciding what the inflation rate is how much people are spending. So if you're going to slow down inflation because you think it's a problem, you're going to have to deal with a rise in unemployment and a drop in GDP as you slow your economy. So we've talked a little bit about indexation. Let's define it explicitly. Warning, explicit content. So when a price, a wage, or an interest rate is adjusted automatically for inflation, we say it's indexed. Some things you might have heard of that are related are COLAs, cost of living adjustments, and ARMs, adjustable rate mortgages. So cost of living adjustments, are basically a contractual provision that allows your wages to exactly keep up with inflation, so they're adjusted automatically without anyone having to argue about them. And then adjustable rate mortgages are a way for lenders to protect themselves from the unexpected inflation by allowing the interest rate to vary directly with inflation. Some examples are the U.S. income tax code is designed so that while a rise in your income might put you into a higher tax bracket, those tax brackets themselves are indexed to inflation so that inflation alone can't kick you into a higher tax bracket. And as we looked at already, Social Security benefits do increase along with the Consumer Price Index each year. And the government offers indexed bonds. When it's borrowing money to pay for its deficits, it basically, on some of them, has indexed bonds. So the interest rate is tied to inflation. All these are designed to protect people from unexpected changes in inflation that might screw up what they're expecting to get paid or what they have to get paid or what they have to pay. All right, let's have a practice question. You've just been awarded a cost of living increase tied to the CPI, Consumer Price Index. The CPI has gone from 110 to 112. If your salary is $30,000 per year before the increase, what will it be after the CPI increase is factored in? Pause, work the problem, and then we'll do the solution. And here comes the solution. First, we need to figure out what the inflation rate has been. To get that, we need the percent change in the CPI. And that means the percent change in CPI or inflation rate is 1.8%. So your new wage is simply your old wage plus 1.8%. An easy way to do it is take your old wage and multiply it by 1 plus 1.8%. And doing that gives you B, 30,545. So what did we just do? We talked about how inflation and deflation create winners and losers. Mostly we talk about the inflation part, because that's mostly what happens in our society. What is indexing? How much can it help? And why do policymakers maintain a stable rate of inflation? All right, peace out.